Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today is April 3rd, 2020, and we're going to write a lot of code today.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Oh yeah. We changed up the layout here a little bit. This is the ASP.NET Core 3.1 workshop. So I've updated the workshop that's out there. That's available for us. And let me get some music playing here in the background. I'm gonna rotate through a couple different songs. As we cross a module, I'll choose a different song to play as we're going through here. Of course, I'm gonna play all day long music to code by from our friend Mr. Carl Franklin. These are songs that are scientifically designed. They're engineered to get you in the flow, to get you in the groove, so that whatever task it is you're working on, you can focus on and just get stuff done. Today's song that we're starting with, this is called Blue. This is the first song that Carl wrote, part of the Music to Code By package. I encourage you to execute the music command in the chat room so you can get that link and get your copy of Music to Code By today. Yeah, absolutely. Carl Franklin jams all day long. We're going to have a great time writing some code together. And I hope you have fun, you enjoy the music, and we learn a little bit together here. And I'm noticing already that the follower list isn't updated with the latest followers. And that's going to annoy me if it doesn't update with the latest actions. That's really going to annoy me. Did it just update? Nope. Nope, it didn't. I see a resub. Yeah, those are older. Animated Slinky with the resub. Okay, got that one. But Evil Chili is from some time ago, and we missed a couple new follows in there. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Refresh the cache of that. There we go. There we go. So the Rendell, Emil, Imbra, Barbiz, Svava with the cheer. Thank you so much. And all of our cheers, all of our subs. Just a reminder, we're donating to the World Health Organization. I still need to find the exact fund to donate to. But we want to help the folks that are on the front line fighting COVID-19. All of our cheers, all of our subs. And like I said, the alerts aren't going to be on here, but we'll see them up here, up above. I very much appreciate the cheers and subs, and we're going to pay that forward. You're going to get some emotes that you can use here on the channel. You're going to turn off the ads, and we're going to, we'll show your name up top there for your contribution, and we're going to make a donation to help the World Health Organization. All right. Yep, the most recent one appears just a little bit larger. And as other follows, other cheers happen, it scrolls up a little bit. So, and yep, it does look like it's updated. All right. I think we're ready to get into this. I think we're ready to start. The source code for this, of course, is at bit.ly/FritzASP.NET Core Workshop. And I did have that GitHub open. That'll get you there quickly. Of course, if you know where my GitHub is, you can browse to it directly. And it's right here pinned as the number 2 repository. And this is where we're going to be working all day today, is with this project and going through and looking at the documentation here. I'm going to be doing a bit of reading of what's inside the documentation and a bit of how it's leading us. But I'm also going to pause, back up, and talk through and answer questions along the way. And when folks do have questions, of course, it'll pop up. I'll bring it up over here on the side using featured chat. Featured chat is that really cool overlay that our friend Lucky Number 7 wrote that allows us to integrate with chat, pull out some questions, highlight them, and let them appear on our overlay over here. You like my terminal background, Cyberlash? Thank you. Appreciate that. You threw in a quick PR to fix the build status image. What build status image? Oh, there's a build status image as part of this. so it shows up. What's the matter with it? Oh, look at that. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, we'll merge that in real quick. So, you're welcome to download the source code to this. You're welcome to use it however you'd like. There we go. This is available for anybody to download, to use. It is free. It is open source. Everything that we're doing here. The license, I believe, yeah, it's an MIT license. Use this how you'd like. Give it to who you want. If you're watching the video, go ahead and share this video. Copy it, reuse it. I hope you're watching it on YouTube, and you're enjoying this. Give it a like. Hit the subscribe button up at the top if you're on YouTube. If you're here on Twitch, hit that follow button. Every time we cross a multiple of 100 followers, we do a sticker giveaway. We did cross 10,200 followers on Twitch. We'll do a sticker giveaway at the end of the first module. All right. Let's get into this. Let's talk about ASP.NET Core. Let's talk about ASP.NET Core 3.1. And have some fun. I think there's a lot that we can get into. Works on a blog built on Blazor. Cool. So ASP.NET Core is built on .NET Core. ASP.NET is, of course, the .NET web development framework. It's not a user interface framework. It's a complete web development framework that you can use that supports all kinds of ways of hosting web applications, building applications for the web, hosting it on a server, hosting it on static files. If you want to run a static website, you can do that and serve some static files and put things like Blazor components in there that will run on top of WebAssembly. That all falls under the concept of ASP.NET Core. Now, I'm already looking and seeing that our application architecture diagram is a little out of date here, but that's okay. We're going to keep moving through here. Dukasoft, thank you for the sub. We're going to make another donation to help the World Health Organization. Very much appreciate that, Duka. So what we're going to do, we're going to set up, we're going to learn about this. .NET Core, ASP.NET Core is completely open source. It's completely free. It's completely developed in the open. You will never be charged if you want to use ASP.NET Core or you want to use .NET Core. Support is available. Paid support is available. Free support, looking at source code, talking to the community. Those things that the open source communities are famous for is always available to you. Paid support is available for the most recent, we call it the current and LTS versions of ASP.NET Core. The LTS version, the long-term support version, is available for support for 3 years plus 1 year of conversion. 1 year into the next one, okay, for at least 3 years. If there's a new LTS version that's released before those 3 years are up, you've got support for 2 of them. So right now, you can get ASP.NET Core 2.1 and 3.1 and have support for both of those for, I believe 2.1 is going to be available for like another 1.5 years from the time of this recording. But ASP.NET Core 3.1 was released in December 2019. You're going to have support for that available through 2023, at which point you're going to be encouraged to move on to a different version. So, different things that you can do around support. There's links available on the Microsoft website if you want to learn more about support for that. It's real easy to get started with the .NET Core. You can either get it as part of Visual Studio, or of course, you can download the SDK. Now, we say SDK, but really, this is the command line interface. And you're going to have this whether you install Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, or you want to work with a text editor. Maybe you like to use Vim. Maybe you like to use Emacs. Maybe you want to use Pico. Fantastic. Atom, brackets. That's okay. Take and run and write code where you're comfortable, where you're going to have fun. This is set up so it runs on every command line, Windows, Mac, and Linux, and you can click through, where is it? I want to show there's other versions available out here. We're on a .NET 5 preview track. If you're watching the recording here, .NET 5 preview is on its way. You may be watching this after .NET 5 was released, but we're working with .NET 3.1. So there's installers available, or you can just download the binaries and put them wherever you'd like on disk. But you can download installers for all the major operating systems. And there's package manager instructions for all of your favorite Linux distributions. Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, OpenSUSE, Red Hat, SLES? I'm not familiar with SLES. That's a new one on me. I'm not sure what SLES. Hey, Josher found the stickers they won in their post. Fantastic. Glad to hear it. So, there's install instructions for all the major operating systems. Okay? And of course, if you're running on Linux and it's not on one of those package managers, you're not using one of those, download the binaries, put them where you'd like. There's pointers to the source code here as well. If you want to go download the source code and compile yourself, you can do that. Oh, it's SUSE Linux. Thank you. The Code Monk, thank you so much for the feedback there. Appreciate the help. And Webface had it as well. Okay. So, I've already downloaded and installed, and I have the command line tools available for me. Not just because I clicked through here. And if you've been watching the stream, you've been watching the rest of the YouTube archive, you know that we spent minimal March on the command line in Linux with Vim. You can do that. Always welcome to take your tools to wherever makes you happy. But I already have this downloaded and installed, so I can run the .NET command line, and it will tell me, hey, I've got some features here. I can run .NET version, and it'll show me I'm actually on a 300 preview. I didn't install that. I don't know where that came from, but okay. Suddenly I've got the 3.1.300 preview. Cool. And there are all kinds of templates out here for you. When you run .NET new, it's going to restore some packages here, make sure it has the latest version of the templates, and there's all kinds of project models for this. .NET isn't just web development. .NET is console applications, and WPF, that's Windows Presentation Foundation applications, very graphical applications for Windows. Windows Forms, those traditional Battleship Gray applications you may have seen going back into the 90s, right? Very full-featured and event-driven, component focused application development. You can build worker services, unit test projects, and here's some of our web projects. Razor components, those are components that you can put in and use inside of web projects. Razor pages for those folks who like to build a very page-focused application. MVC, maybe you like Ruby on Rails and you like that model view controller architecture. That's completely supported as a first-class user interface framework with web development that we have. And Blazor here, that's our new component-based user interface development framework. And there's some very simple templated ones down here that are empty, model view controller, a complete application, and a web app that uses Razor pages. Really, really great stuff. It looks like a lot of different choices, but we've brought to you literally all the different things that you may want to build with .NET. And when we get to .NET 5, you're going to see mobile applications appear in this list. So you can build and use .NET on the command line to build mobile apps. It's really great stuff that we're excited to see develop, and folks get encouraged to be able to use and empower folks to build with .NET wherever you want to be. Unhip Coder points out about WinForms applications. Let me tell you. There it is. Battleship Gray user interface. It's all the rage. Everybody wants it. No, that's not a thing. I'm sorry. So, hey Gnarly, good to see you. Eternal Dev Coder asks a question here, and before we decide to choose which type of framework, Are Razor pages more encouraged than MVC? I'm going to say no, because what we like about the two different ways, approaches to building web applications, there are folks who feel very web page focused. I'm going to build, this is the web page that I'm going to present, so I want everything to build that page, all the logic for it, in one file. And you can do that. That's what Razor pages are really nice at building. MVC is a very testable, very unit testable framework that you can use because you want that separation of logic. You want to be able to use different views around the same controller actions so that you can mix and match as need be, and have your model completely separated from that. So your data model is isolated and you can put all your data concerns in one place, isolated away from the rest of your web framework. So it's really a question about providing choice for folks. What makes you happy about the way you develop, and you can build using that technique. Thank you for the question, Eternal Dev Coder. That's right, Stelzy. The SDK reference is basically just a NuGet package whose props and targets files are imported. Yep. Excuse me. So Gnarly asks, and we can just go over these quickly. Can we go over what each one of these templates are briefly and talk about advantages and disadvantages? I'll go over them quickly because there's so many of them. Console application, of course, is a console application. You can build and deploy and run it on Windows, Mac, or Linux console application. Class libraries, and you see a number of these labeled as class libraries. These are different ways that you can put business logic into a DLL. And if you're a long-time Windows user, or even a short time, if you're just a Windows user, let's start there. You've seen DLLs on disk. That's what these things are. You've put your business logic, you've put some reusable things into a library that you can reference from other projects, from those front-end or service back-end projects. So you have that flexibility of where you consume those things. Thank you for the follow, Gmata M. Appreciate that. So, WPF, you see Application Class Library, Custom Control Library. Those are things that help you build those Windows Presentation Foundation projects. Runs only on Windows, takes advantage of the graphical libraries and the capabilities that are in your graphics card, compared to Windows Forms, which don't take advantage of it, are really lower end user interface interactions. But WPF is built with XAML, so you get that nice markup experience that folks enjoy about web, where WinForms is built with it's how do I explain how it's laid out? There's a nice designer that helps you with the layout, and it ends up writing locations on disk into files of where things should be placed. But you have a tremendous designer experience with Windows Forms. There is a designer for WPF and XAML, but it's not great. It's not great. That's right, DLLs are dynamic link libraries. That's what DLL stands for. And yes, this will be a VOD later. You'll find it on the YouTube. So, scrolling down, services are, it's a service that'll run in the background. I'm not quite sure what the worker service is. I don't know if that's intended to be a web worker service, but worker services are typically background tasks that you'll start and run and install on a server, so they run on their own independent of human interaction. The unit test projects here are different unit tests. They're test frameworks that you can use so you can test your projects and make sure that your code works appropriately. So you write a test, point it to another piece of your application, and say execute, go through this, and it just works. Oh, that is the ASP.NET Worker Service. Okay, so that's intended to be a low ceremony, the worker template up here, very low ceremony service that has all of the features of ASP.NET, can act as a web endpoint and run as a background service. So you have a couple different ways that you can use a couple different test frameworks here. Unit test project using the MS test framework, NUnit using NUnit framework. I'm not sure, a test project, and you can create test items. You have a test item template there. And XUnit, XUnit is kind of the preferred, the more popular of the 3 unit test libraries for .NET Core developers, because the folks who built XUnit were on the .NET Core team at the time .NET Core started. So you'll see a lot of XUnit tests for things that are built by the team. Continuing to scroll down, Razor components, like that's actually a component template, and same thing with the Razor page. Those are item templates, not project templates. One to build a component that's reusable inside of a web project. A Razor page is that page first design for a web application. A view imports, view start, those are item templates, different pieces of the MVC application that control references, and a start page that kicks off how you integrate with MVC. Blazor server applications, Blazor WebAssembly applications, these are the 2 types of Blazor projects that we have available. You can build with that component first architecture that's being rolled out as part of .NET Core 3.1. We're not going to be focused on Blazor today, but when we get into the 7th module later today, will take us a little bit of a challenge to integrate a Blazor component with our application. But those component-based applications, you can build and run your components and have them render either server-side or in the browser using WebAssembly. This is an empty project that literally has no code for you, lets you build how you want. The beginning template for a model view controller project, a beginning template for a Razor Pages project, and a beginning template if you want to use Angular or React to interact, React and Redux. Couple more. Some of these are file templates in here as well. A gRPC service will build a gRPC service in that 7th module as well, as part of a little bit of a challenge to go off script and show how you can integrate some of these other things. A web API project template if you're building just API endpoints, those RESTful endpoints that folks want to connect in and request things from your web server, interact with your web server, and get that machine first interaction. Web API and gRPC, you're going to see, are very similar. A get ignore file, a global JSON file. The global JSON file specifies the version of the SDK, the command line interface that we're using. You can have many versions of the command line interface installed on your machine, on your developer workstation, and use a global JSON file to specify which version to use. NuGet config defines, that's a file template that specifies what NuGet resources, where do I go to get my packages to build my .NET project. Some enterprises, some organizations have a very tight control on how they reference and use packages. So where everybody goes to NPM to get node packages, in some organizations, they want to control the security of those things. So in the .NET world, they'll have a NuGet server or even a NuGet file folder sitting somewhere on their network, and they'll override the NuGet config and say, don't go out to NuGet.org to get packages from the public repository. Instead, come to our private repository that everybody can use. Tool manifest, it allows you to define .NET command line tools specific to this project. Web config helps configure your IIS, your Windows web server. Solution file is how we group together a series of projects. And a protocol buffer file is used for gRPC, so you can specify how those remote procedure calls should be communicated in a cross-platform way that's supported by Java, Python, JavaScript, PHP. Did I just say PHP? Ruby, Dart. Is it supported by Dart? I just threw Dart out there because it's a very Google thing to say. So, hey, Layla Codesit is here. Hello, Layla. Good to see you. You like NUnit as you like the attributes, but XUnit is a little bit better maintained. Let me say hello to folks in the chat room here. Their unit testing is available for Razor Pages, but it's a little bit trickier. I don't feel like it's as pure as testing model view controller, MVC, applications. Yes, the different unit test frameworks, they're subtle difference, but they do basically the same things. Yep. The way XUnit and NUnit report when you run tests, subtle differences. XUnit has a lot more ceremony to it, where NUnit, you can just console write line, and it'll capture that and log those things. But the NUnit team has been around for a long time, and they're not maintaining as quickly as the XUnit folks. The Naked Flame says, making a new website with the ASP.NET Core 3.1 API, and it's been awesome. But that was after you tried making your website with .NET Core with the Angular template, and you found that to be a nightmare. So this is a very good point. The folks that make the Angular template up there are not the Angular team. It's the .NET folks, and they're coming in after the fact to light that up. And they're not Angular first folks. So building an API and adding on, layering into it, your Angular application or your Vue application or React is going to find you much success. And you're going to see in our first module here, we're going to build an API, right? An API endpoint that a web server will respond to. And if you're one of those JavaScript framework developers and you prefer that, it's going to look and feel very familiar to be able to hook up to. So thank you for the comment, The Naked Flame. Really appreciate it. Code Show asks, 8 hours! 8 hours! I still have to try streaming for that long. It's a marathon. It's a marathon. We have to take it one step at a time. We'll get through it. We'll have a lot of fun. And this is nothing. This is nothing. Because in 2 weeks, write it down, friends, in 2 weeks, we're going to do the 12-hour developer show. Friday, April 17, we're going to go for 12 hours. We're going to start a little bit earlier than normal, and we're going to go right into the evening. And we're going to have Fritz family members helping out with lunch and dinner. We're going to have guests joining us. It's going to be tremendous. And there's a couple folks here in the chat room that I wanted to ask to join for part of that as well. Yes, Layla, that's a very good point. Let me put that up on the chat here. This is a lot of cool templates here, but Layla makes a good point here. You can also make your own templates and deploy them with the CLI. So just like I mentioned for NuGet config, there's folks in various enterprises that say you must use our new versions of these NuGet packages that we've blessed, we've approved. Some folks will say remove all of these templates and use our organization's standard template that has the way we do things to start a web application. And it has our formatting, and it has the way we want to pull together Angular and Vue or whatever it might be to build. You have complete flexibility here. There's great documentation on how you can build templates to go with this. Hey, lucky number 7 is here. It must have heard that I was making some use of that tremendous. Check out featured.chat. That's what you're seeing. The questions come up over there. We bring that in so that we can highlight some of those questions. So folks that are watching the recording, you can see some of the questions that I'm answering. And I don't know if you've seen me doing this on the YouTube, the YouTube archive. The more in-depth questions that we bring up over there, I highlight and I put a timestamp on in the description. So make sure you click the description below the YouTube videos, and you can click those if there's a particular question that you're interested in. You can click that link and jump right to the question in the YouTube recording. It's really great stuff. Let me take a look here. Simon points out the new Angular 8 project templates in Visual Studio 2019 have some nice Microsoft Build integration, but you do have to know that both Angular and Web API to get it up and running. Yeah. You're using two different technologies. you need to know a little bit of both in order to get these things up and running. Where folks in the past, when we had ASP.NET web forms, folks could kind of focus and know just web forms, and they didn't have to know JavaScript or CSS or right. They could focus on just C# and that component framework and be productive, because it would translate and build out the styles and the JavaScript interactions appropriately for you, using whatever components made sense. But when you do start mixing and you get into these hybrid types of applications that are a little bit of Angular, a little bit of Web API, you're going to see that you need to know a little bit more of both of them to be successful. That'd be a cool idea, to make stream markers when we click the questions. That might be cool to do. Yes, so we've seen, right, I did .NET New and made it, I have these templates. Stelzy points out you can make tools that you can run at the .NET command line, and we're going to run some tools today that use Entity Framework and allow us to orchestrate and interact with Entity Framework. That's our data modeling and object relationship manager framework that we're going to be using. But you can make tools available that'll work on Windows and Linux and ship those tools via NuGet. Real easy stuff to do. We're not going to get into command line tools, building command line tools today. Maybe we can do that in another stream. But very good point from Stelzy. Thank you for sharing. Yep, it's the SDK that gives you the good bits. You don't need Visual Studio. You don't need Visual Studio Code. In fact, I was going to say maybe we roll over and do a little on the Chromebook at some point today. Maybe I can figure out a way to get code over there and we can pick up and do a little bit of work from our Chromebook today. Just so you can see that we're going to work on the command line with Linux, and I'm not hooked into Visual Studio. Let's ignore Linux. No. Oh, you develop with Ed, the text editor. Oh, good luck to you. All the best. Okay. So there's a little bit about all the different things that we have available to us as we build and work on .NET at the command line. But not everybody wants to work at the command line, right? There are some folks that are very, they're like the mechanics in our industry. They'll go out and they'll buy a car, but they bought the car knowing I'm gonna, as soon as I get home, flip open the hood and I'm gonna rewire it. I'm gonna soup up the engine. I'm gonna update it and do this, that, and the other, and change out the way that the oil filter is, and all. You can do that. And you can do that at the command line, but there are a lot of folks that prefer to just use Visual Studio so they can be productive and not think about some of those other things that really intrigue and other folks are really interested in going after. So let's create a folder here. And I'm just going to call this, let's call this Twitch Workshop. So I have some place that I'm going to be working. Okay, and I'll be working in this folder because the source code, the complete source code for the application is out here. I believe it's in source in save points. Source might not be completely updated. We'll get that updated at some point later today. But you can find save points for each one of the modules in the save points folder as we go through the day. So I talked a little bit now about getting .NET, and let's talk about the project here for a little bit. So that was Octotree. This is a plugin I have for GitHub that'll allow me to navigate my file structure here very easily. What we're going to build today, this is, and if you've seen one of my other ASP.NET Core workshops here on stream on the YouTube channel, this is just an update of those with some new features that, like I said, we're going to light up in the 7th module. So there are basically 3 projects that we're going to build. We're going to build a back-end service that ASP.NET Core is fantastic at. We're going to set up a web server that has Entity Framework models, some models for interacting with our database, and some APIs, those RESTful endpoints that you're going to be able to connect into to query update, add, even delete data from in this back-end service. We're going to have a shared project called Conference DTO that has data transfer objects that we're going to make available to share between both our back-end service and our front end. That's going to be that typical front-end web application you would use to interact with as a browser, right? Through your browser. That's going to be all of our front-end webby things, right? HTML, JavaScript, all in that front-end project. So our front-end project is going to make queries to our back-end, almost like a microservice project over here. And it's going to have this common language of conference DTOs that it's going to share between the two. There is a final module at the end that I'm not going to cover. You're welcome to check out. That is a series of JavaScript services using a SPA front end, right? That single page application front end. For those folks that are interested in JavaScript and how it interacts, all of that source code is available here in the GitHub repository as well. Can we say it's JavaScript but use Blazor, says Degs. That's not a bad idea to put a Blazor version of the front end in here as well. You know what? Let me take that as a to-do item to come back and update this so that we have a Blazor front end on this. So, all right. Yes, do what you love. It's not a prescription. Absolutely. All right. We have a very simple database schema. No, back up. Here it is. So we're building a conference website. Okay, and I'm actually not going to use the default data that was shipped with this. I think we'll load up data for the Live Coders Live Coders conference. We'll load up some of that data so we can use it later. But there is default data here if you want to use it. We'll load up some of this data, save it, and make it available on the GitHub repository. So we have a series of conferences that we may be managing. Conferences, of course, have tracks. Tracks have sessions. So we see these key to many indicators. And if you're not familiar with relational database architecture, you have a key, in this case a conference ID, that is referenced by another table, right? So here we have a conference ID references the conference's ID field. So entries in this table reference this. Tracks have a conference ID, so all of the tracks, and there's many of them, the infinity, reference one conference ID. The tracks have a series of sessions, and the sessions, you can see, have a track ID. So there are many sessions, right? The infinity, many sessions, that reference one track. And similarly, and so forth through here, we have speakers at a conference. Those speakers speak at a session. Now, this is interesting. We have this middle table here, this many-to-many, that says there are many session speakers for each speaker. So a speaker may speak at multiple sessions. But multiple speakers may speak at multiple sessions. So how do we do that? Each speaker, here's an ID, has a mapping to a session that they are presenting. So this might be Jeff Fritz is presenting ASP.NET Core Intro. Jeff Fritz presenting, right? So we'll have a pointer to Jeff Fritz and a pointer to Intro to Blazor is the session, right? So you have this way that you can link these two tables together if you're not familiar with relational database architecture. Sessions can be tagged, and the same thing here, many-to-many relationship. Many sessions can have many different tags. And attendees can go to many different sessions. So we have this same many-to-many relationship. So that foreign key, that's the term for it. Yep. These, right, session ID, this is a foreign key. The actual instance of it is over here that we're referencing. And over here you'll see many copies of that same session ID in this table. Thank you for the follow, L. Simmons. Appreciate you joining us. Thank you for tuning in. Been doing this for 10 years and you always mess up crow's feet notation in ERD documents. Yeah, I know that feeling. The key to infinity notation here, nice graphical way to do it, but what L. Simmons is referring to is instead of having, you can have this be an arrow in ERD, entity relationship diagrams. This will be an arrow, and on the other side to show that it's referencing many of these. You'll see it looks like a pitchfork, right? You have crow's feet. It looks like an upside down W there, pointing into the session attendee. So these are the various modules that we're going to go through here today. There are 8 of them, and we're going to end after that 7th, I believe. And we're probably going to skip the 6th because I don't want to do deployment. But that content is available for you. The only reason I don't want to do deployment is because it's very easy for me to dox myself, and I've had tremendous luck with working with Azure on stream. Right? What can I tell you?
60% of the time, it works every time.
I just get unlucky with how I deploy. So, am I planning on using ASP.NET Identity for managing users? Yes. Yes, we are. DD Walsh is here. Good morning. Thank you. It's like not really an M, but yeah. It looks like an upside down. Yeah, it's a pitchfork. So, testify. Well, I would like to. And I have many emails into folks about some of the challenges that we have. So, Veronica Hex, hello. Good to see you. Smab is here. Still need to work out how to deploy ASP.NET Core Docker images to your NAS. Might try that later. So what Smab is pointing out here, some people's network attached storage, I have a Synology server here in the house, will run Docker. And you can package up ASP.NET Core applications and deploy it as a Docker container. And it works really great. I can deploy those images to my NAS. You have to open firewall ports so that you can browse to and get to the content on that Docker container. But it works amazing. Jean Valjean with the raid. Thank you so much for bringing your viewers over here. Hello, hello. Welcome in. My name is Jeff Fritz, and we're in the middle of our ASP.NET Core workshop. We're not even in the middle. We're just getting started. You caught us right at the beginning here. We talked about getting .NET, what it looks like at the command line, and we're about to start building an API web service, an API web application that we can deploy and use on all kinds of different services. Alexander, thank you so much for the follow. Appreciate that. Taking a look here. Would be awesome with a Synology ASP.NET deploy tutorial. Dukasoft, can you do me a favor so that I don't forget? Can you go over to, let me show you over here on my GitHub. There is a Fritz live stream. Either create an issue in here about, and we did finish this command. We built this command. There is a no more and then command. But open an issue or mention it in the Discord server. You can find information about the Discord just below me here on Twitch, or execute the Discord command and you can get access to it. But remind me, that would be really good to do how to deploy your ASP.NET Core application to a Synology. I can definitely show you that. Let's take a look here. Yep, I just got my my Synology NAS within the last month. Really great stuff. It runs and serves my videos and photos and my backups very, very quickly. I'm quite happy with it. All right, so let's get into this. Let's start creating our first project here. This is going to manage back-end services. This is going to be more like a microservice that you might see that's intended for machines to interact with. This isn't really intended for humans to query, but machines or other web applications, mobile applications, Power BI applications might reach in and query and interact with these types of services. Now, I'm using Visual Studio 2019, but I'm going to create an ASP.NET Core web application. We're going to call this, we're going to put it into a conference planner solution, and we're going to call this the backend service. and we're going to build an API. Now, if you're at the command line, here are the .NET new commands that you execute to do this. .NET new solution, .NET new web API, and .NET solution add, and you reference the project that you're adding. So you get this cool little interface. Not interface, but you get this cool little separation of a solution that contains 3 projects that are related and allow us to easily reference each other. I got a 4-drive Synology. I forget which version it is. 9 something. So, all right. So I'm going to scroll down here, and we're going to build a crumbs. ASP.NET Core. Don't do this to me. I restarted everything so it would run nice and lickety split. So we're going to build a web application. And why didn't I get the template? Oh, because I didn't get there yet. All right. So the location I want to put it down in is here. So I'll paste that in. And the solution name, like it said, is Conference Planner. There we go. And we're going to call this the backend service. All right. So we'll create that. And it should come up and ask me for some templates here. There we go. I'm in .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 3.1. And we're going to choose an API. It's automatically going to be configured for HTTPS. It's got features for us there, so it'll light up and hook up certificates, development certificates for us here on our workstation. I'm not going to turn on Docker support here, and you can see this came from Microsoft. It's one of the official 3.13 templates. So we'll create that. Let me take a look up there. Is that Real Kayak? And thank you for the follow. John Peak and Franklin89. Thank you so much for the subs. And we're going to make a donation to the World Health Organization and help them fight the good fight against COVID-19. Lily Hazel is here. Hello, hello, my friend. There she is. Welcome in. Oh, John Peak gifted a sub to Franklin. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Very much appreciate that. Do I use any cool extensions in Visual Studio? I try not to. I want to keep this as stock as possible, so you see what the official, right, the default Visual Studio experience is. A lot of folks will add in Code Rush. My friend Code Rushed here on the Live Coders team, that's Mark Miller. He works for DevExpress. Mark Miller, he works for DevExpress. Tremendous plugin that does all kinds of great refactoring features inside Visual Studio. You can also get ReSharper from the folks at JetBrains. A lot of great plugins that you can use with this. Those are the 2 big ones that you'll see folks layer on top of Visual Studio. Hey Flav, good to see you. And Chef Brent is here. Good morning. So good to see you. There you go. I'm using the Enterprise Edition of Visual Studio 2019. You can't see it, but I have the preview flag back here, back behind the actions list, the events list that's happened up there. This is 16.6 Preview 2.1 that we're using. I like to use the preview versions of Visual Studio here on the channel, so you can see some of the cool things that are coming, and we can experiment and learn a little bit about what's being built as well. Haven't used ReSharper in years, as it used to force Visual Studio to render text slower while typing, says L. Simmons. Yeah, so ReSharper is notorious for running in the same memory space as Visual Studio and running out of memory because of how it processes and manages your application. Code Rush handles that a little bit better, so you get a little bit better performance out of Code Rush. And I'm not compensated by either of those companies to comment on it. I think they're just really cool tools. Let's see here. Let's get into a little bit of our source code here. I hope that font size is good enough. Is that font size good for everybody? I think it should be. I even opened up the size of the editor here so you could see more of what's going on. So, we're going to build, to start off here, we're going to build a way for, in our conference, a way to store information about speakers. Well, in C#, everything is object-oriented. So a speaker is a class, and a class has properties. So we're going to have an ID for our speaker. Our speakers have names. They have some bio information about who those speakers are, and we're going to have a website. Where can I learn more information about this person? So we create a class that has these properties. And a property is denoted by giving a access modifier, a type, and then the name of the property. Then we have, well, what are we allowed to do with this? Well, you can get the ID, and you can set the ID. And there's other ways that you can set access to these, whether it's public, private, internal, for get and set if you want to change it from the default that's defined over here. These things that you see in square brackets above the properties, these are called attributes. And these attributes are even more specifically referred to as component annotations. Now, required means that when we're working with this, we want to make sure that the name is a required field. You can't create a speaker without a name. That's just silly. And it's got a maximum string length of 200 characters. Bio has a maximum string length of 4,000, and the website has a maximum length of 1,000. Now, those aren't enforced by the C# compiler when you're working with this. They are enforced by other libraries, other features of the .NET frameworks that we're going to be using here. And I'm using frameworks because we're going to use Entity Framework to help enforce some of this. And our Razor templates are going to help enforce some of these constraints as well. So let's create a models folder, and we're going to create our speaker class inside that folder. So I'm going to right click up here on my project. I'm going to add a new folder. There it is, models. And I'm going to use a hotkey, Alt-Shift-C. Karnak isn't running. Karnak, where'd you go on me here, friend? Let me turn these on, and after I create this class, I'll come back over and answer some questions there from the chat room. So, is Karnak there? Karnak? Where'd you go there, friend? I'm going to restart Karnak. Karnak puts an overlay of the hotkeys that I use here, so you can learn a little bit. There you go. Alt-Shift-C, you see that in the corner? And I'm going to create a class here called Speaker. So Alt-Shift-C says, create a new class in Visual Studio, wherever I am in, this is my Solution Explorer over here on the left. So there, I'm in this namespace, and a namespace is a way to organize your code. So this is the namespace backend.models. I'll be able to reference my speaker class by reaching into backend.models.speaker and be able to access that instance. So the actual syntax of what's here isn't what's too important. And I'm going to just copy it in so you don't sit here and watch me type all these things. Now, I think I saw there was a question in the chat room here. Let me make sure that I grab it here. Where is it? My goodness. There it is. Death Knight asks a question. Are these standard C# attributes? They're not standard to C#, but they are standard to what we call the .NET base class library, the base features that everybody has available to them and you can kind of expect to have when you deploy an application. And they're part of system.component model data annotations. So you'll find this delivered with the .NET Core framework and usable no matter which platform you're on. So it's not standard per se, but it's available everywhere. Right. So let me see here. Thank you for the follow, Trulian. Appreciate you joining us. Let me just take a look here. And I'm not going to answer all the questions that are coming through here. If they're a little bit repeated, I want to make sure that I keep moving things forward. Yeah, we're maybe 10 minutes into the actual workshop itself. We took some time explaining what .NET is first. But our friend Jean Valjean asks, what about the key property on the ID field? Do you need it? Or is ID every time mapped as an ID field? This is a good question, because if we go back to our data model that we talked about earlier, right? So we created a speakers table. We're going to create a speakers table, and clearly the ID is our unique identifier. And in database parlance, you would call that a key, a primary key. And Jean Valjean is asking about the key. I think you're referring to, it's called a key attribute, right? Or, right, that we would put up here. We would say key, and you can see, if I didn't mouse away from it, denotes one or more properties that uniquely identify an entity. You can do that to kind of force that, hey, this field is the key. You don't have to do that because you're right. Anytime that an ID property appears inside of a class that's going to be used by our entity framework data access library, object relation, ORM, our object relational mapping library, it's inferred that that is the key. That's right, you're coding by a convention that the ID is a key. Thank you for the question, Jean Valjean. Appreciate it. Good morning, friends. Good to see some new folks tuning in. Was there a question here? Shuchi asks, let me put this up. I'm not going to dig too far into this. Do I have a link that helps folks understand when to choose .NET Framework versus .NET Core? .NET Framework is the version of .NET that's been available since 2001. So it's been around for almost 20 years, runs only on Windows, but has some tremendous projects that are available, project models that folks can use. But .NET Framework is being put into maintenance mode. No further development of new features will be added to .NET Framework. .NET Core is where investment is being done going forward, because .NET Framework is really a component of Windows. So if you want to do something outside of Windows, you can't use .NET Framework. So .NET Core going forward is what's recommended by the Microsoft team for development. And I'll even take that a step further, because in November,
there can be only one.
We won't have .NET Framework 4.8. We won't have .NET Core 4. There'll be just .NET 5. And .NET 5 brings together the things that were in .NET Framework: Windows Forms development, WPF development, web development, which is also in .NET Core. You have all of those things, and mobile development with Xamarin. So .NET 5 means there's only one .NET framework being managed going forward, and it's called just .NET. So I would say going forward, use .NET Core is the recommended direction. But even more than .NET Core, it is the one .NET to rule them all. Forged in the fires of Redmond. Well played, Surly Dev. I like that. I like that a lot. The one .NET framework to rule them all, forged in the fires of Redmond. There you go. So there isn't really a document there isn't a document per se, but there are some blog posts from the director of .NET Program Management, Scott Hunter, that you can find on the ASP.NET weblog out there that you can read. Josh Schur asks, and this is a very good question, and he's almost reading ahead here. Spoiler alert. What about .NET Standard? .NET Standard, you know what? I'm going to cover this question when we get to the next project where we're actually working on .NET Standard. That's a great question, and I'm going to park it for now, and we'll talk about .NET Standard when we get to the next project. So, all right, let me go back here. So we added our speaker object. Now let's add the capabilities so that we can interact with the database so we can interact with where we're going to save this. So we can do that by adding NuGet package references. Just like NPM and P8 had NPM for Node folks, and what is it, Pair for PHP folks, and what is it for Python? Anaconda helps with Python. It's not, Anaconda isn't the thing. I forget the name of the package manager for Python. Maven for Java folks. We have NuGet packages for .NET Pip. That's what it is for Python. Thank you, L. Simmons. So we can add packages at the command line using a command like this, .NET add package. And I can do that right here. I'll go into my conference planner folder. I'll go into that backend project, and I'm going to paste in that command. .NET add package, Microsoft entity. You know what? It's behind me there. Let's move it up to the top of the screen. There we go. .NET add package, and now it's behind the other thing. I can't win here, can I? I tell you, folks. So .NET add package, Microsoft Entity Framework Core, SQL Server. So this is going to get me the ability to connect to SQL Server, right? Microsoft SQL Server with my project. Well, maybe you don't like SQL Server. Maybe you're not on Windows. Maybe you'd prefer to work with SQLite. Well, that's okay. We can add a package that'll support SQLite as well. And it's exactly the same command. .NET add package, Microsoft Entity Framework Core, SQLite version 3.13, and it's installed and is now written to disk. Need a shorter prompt. I know, it's putting that entire folder in there, and it's getting really long. Yep, 8 hours. That's right. Mary Jo Stabler. Hello, hello. So, does it support NoSQL databases as well? Entity Framework was designed to be able to, but folks prefer to work directly with the APIs for those NoSQL databases. So, is there a way to easily list? I gotta put this up separately because I parked that other one. Is there a way to easily list what database packages there are via the command line? I don't know if you can search NuGet directly from the command line, but you can go to nuget.org and search for Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and it'll show you relational abstractions. There's SQL Server, an in-memory database if you'd like. There's SQLite. But you'll also find folks like Oracle. I think it's Oracle Entity Framework Core. There it is. Their driver, because Oracle makes it, is under the Oracle namespace, not the Microsoft namespace. Just like MySQL. If you want to use MySQL, there's the one for that. I don't think it's Postgres. I think it's PGSQL. There we go. So there's the one from the Postgres, folks. NPGSQL, Entity Framework Core, and that'll get you up to speed if you want to connect to Postgres. I don't think MongoDB is in here. No. MongoDB and those types of NoSQL databases, you'll see folks just connect into, and they don't use an entity relational mapper because, like Entity Framework, because it's not relational. House Bisuk, thank you so much for the resub. Is that 13 months? Is that 13 months? Oh my goodness, thank you so much for more than a year with us. Really great stuff. And we'll make a donation to the World Health Organization and help them fight the good fight against COVID-19. Yeah, Cosmos DB. That's right, this is Sparta. There's another database that folks will use that's non-relational. It's NoSQL that folks will work with, and they'll work with using that API directly. And you can hide that API behind a repository model because you don't care. The rest of your application, I don't want to get too far into architecture. The rest of your application doesn't care how you communicate to the database. The application just wants to be able to go get data from the repository. If the repository is SQLite, SQL Server, MongoDB, Cosmos DB, maybe it's a file on disk, it doesn't care. The rest of the application just wants that data, wants to save data. So you set up what's called a repository pattern here, and you're going to see a little bit of that pattern in this application. Thank you for the follow, Shankar20. Appreciate it. MongoDB has its own ODM called Mongoose. Very cool. So, next thing we need to do in order to work with our entity relationship mapper is to create a database context. And this is what's going to do the mapping. This is, right, we're going to inherit from a specific database context from Entity Framework that does all the work. We're going to create our own that sits on top of it that will specify there's a collection of speakers in this database that you can work with. And the DB context that's referenced up there is, right, that's a different class, is going to go and do all the work to actually generate the insert, update, and delete statements into our relational database. So let me create this class. Inside the model folder, we'll call it application DB context, and I'm just going to copy out the contents of it. Go back over here to Visual Studio, and let's use the right keystrokes. Jeff, what are you doing? What are you doing? There we go. Application DB context. Here we go. And I'm going to paste these in, that source code. And there was a reference in the source code that we had initially, right, that was in the workshop guide to put this :db context. In C#, saying :db context says inherit from this other class. And if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming, what that means is we're going to take application DB context and we're saying this is a database context. It has all the features of DB context, and we're adding more, and we're customizing it specific to our application. Now, Visual Studio helpfully puts these little red squiggle lines underneath of it, these little, right, the little wavy lines underneath of it. I can control dot on those and will generate appropriate using statements. So remember when I said earlier about namespace kind of gives us a way to categorize where things are living? You reference and specify, use things out of those namespace, shortcut my references by generating these using statements up at the top of the screen. And you'll see if you're watching this on a recording at the high resolution, you'll be able to tell that the Entity Framework core statement is a little bit brighter than the dimmed lines here for the other using statements. That's because when I mouse over it, Visual Studio is telling me that the using directive is unnecessary. That's a feature that this editor provides, so I can actually say, you know what, I don't need these. So Visual Studio gives me this little light bulb that I can click and remove those extra using statements that I don't need. And when you have thousands of these files running around in a project, because you've got a very complex, very large project, extra using statements are going to add extra seconds, extra time to your compile. So it's sometimes a good idea to clean them up, but not necessary. The compiler will handle it with how small this application is we're building for this workshop. Not entirely necessary to remove those, but I did want to show you that so you knew why some of that notation was appearing. Let me take a look here. A couple comments. Real Kayak finally joined Twitch. Happy to find this channel. Well, thank you so much, Real Kayak. Very happy that you're joining us, and I look forward to seeing more from you in the chat room as we go through the project here today. All the bases, class stuff belong to... That's right, Mary Jo. Box has a comment here, and it's not a bad one. Why not use IDB set instead of DB set? Because it stands for solid. Better depend on abstractions, not on implementation details. You can do this. You can absolutely do this. This is a beginner course. I'm not going to get into that here. Don't want to confuse folks. But that's absolutely something that you can do. Like I said, don't want to overcomplicate getting into architecture things that are a little bit further down the road here. So, Joshua is right here. Are you certain the compiler doesn't ignore unused usings anyway? It does. but it needs to identify and understand that they're unused. And if you have thousands of files, that's time that the compiler doesn't need to be wasting. It does ignore, but it needs to understand if it can ignore it. So, not a problem, Gnarly. And that's the point. That's why I stress this is a beginner workshop, and the folks that have questions, maybe you're brand new to dotnet, maybe this is your first time looking at Visual Studio. I want to make sure I answer all of your questions. No question is too simple. There are some questions that are asking about, well, can you optimize? Can you take an advanced technique here? And I will answer those questions, but I'm not going to dig into them. I'm going to hold those off as advanced questions or even intermediate questions that I want to make sure we focus on answers for the beginner folks. And I see some friends here in the chat room. Friends from the Live Coders team like Rambling Geek and Mary Jo Stabler, and the Bald Bearded Builder as well. Want to promote and make sure that, you know, they're happy to answer questions along the way here. Some of them are tremendous web developers, some of them are tremendous .NET developers. There's all kinds of great folks on the Live Coders team, so make sure you check them. They're great friends, absolutely. Gnarly, thank you so much for the sub. Look at that. Really great stuff, and we're going to make a donation to help the World Health Organization. You're going to get those 17 emotes that we have here on the channel, and turn off the ads here on Twitch. Thank you so much. Space Shot makes a very good point. I'm gonna put this up because I do want to make sure that everybody sees this, and I'm just now reminded of it. If you're wondering about something that we're doing here, other people probably are also, and that's okay. Ask the question. If somebody in chat can answer it quickly, they will. If it's something that we want to bring up and make sure folks on the recording see, and we want to dig a little bit further into, we'll bring it up like Chris's statement here, Space Shots, and we'll talk about it a little bit further here. I'm going to be here all day. It's going to be recorded and available on YouTube, so you can search through it a little bit. And I hope you have a good time with this. I saved the Bald Bearded Builder today. What did I do? What? I saved the Bald Bearded Builder. Let me see. What did I do here? Been out of coffee for a week, but guess what arrived? Oh my gosh, look what arrived for our friend, the Bald Bearded Builder. A little bit of Madrinas. Very nice. It's so good. I have a little bit of vanilla cap here ready to go in a little bit. Thank you so much for the share. Yeah. Madrinas, they're a sponsor of the channel here. I want to make sure we call out and thank our friends over there for supporting us here on the C# Fritz channel. Thank you for the follow, Living Margaritaville. It's going to be 5 o'clock somewhere, and it's going to be 5 o'clock at the end of this workshop. Oh boy. Yeah, you can execute the coffee command. You can ask about Madrina's coffee, and it'll answer there for you. They've been out of your favorite flavor for a few weeks, Wookiee Slayer. Oh no. Drop me a line about which flavor it is you're looking for on Twitter. Make sure you hashtag Madrinas, and our friends at Madrinas will help you out. First try, and it's amazing. Glad you're enjoying it. I forgot to turn on live share here. I'm going to have live share running all day here. Let me turn this on. If you have Visual Studio, if you downloaded Visual Studio Code, maybe you don't have either one of those. Maybe you're on a Mac. Maybe you're looking on a tablet. If you want to tune in, you can even click through on your browser, and we'll give you the ability to navigate around the projects as we're working on it. I'm going to create this timer out here on Stream Elements. Let me pop this out. And I'm going to add a new timer here, and we're going to call this live share. So every, let's make it pop up every 10 minutes. And we'll say, connect and navigate around the code for this project in your own editor or browser. Join the live share at, not r, at, and we'll post that link and activate that timer. There we go. So, no, that's not what I wanted to do. So now, if you're a beginner, if you want to take a look, there's a read-only live share there, and you'll see your initials will pop up at the top there, next to where it says sharing read-only. And you'll be able to navigate around the project. You'll be able to take a look at things. If there's something you don't understand, we'll show you how all of it works. And if you click that, it will open in your Visual Studio editor. That's right. Or you can open it in a browser if you'd like, and you'll get the Visual Studio code editor in a browser navigating around this project. And I think you have to log in with GitHub. GitHub or your Microsoft account, and you'll get navigating around and you can take a look. So, all right. So, we've created, this is how we're going to interact with our database. We've got this application database context, and it has a collection of speakers in the database. That's really easy to do, but now we need to actually specify, how do you get to it? Well, I don't have SQL Server installed on my machine. I purposely didn't install it. I don't think I have it installed. I think I uninstalled it. I might have uninstalled it. You can run SQL Server in a container, absolutely. It takes up a little bit too much memory running on this machine that I'm also running OBS on, and Visual Studio and the compiler. So I'm going to pass on running it in a container. It's really good in a container. But because I'm running some very processor-intensive things already, and OBS is a monster for how I'm producing and presenting, I'm going to pass on that, and I'm actually going to use the SQLite instance of this. So I'm just writing a file to disk, and it works really, really nice for that. I could run off of SQL Azure. Absolutely, I could do that. I'm going to run on SQLite, though. I think it's something easy to use here. Creating this project with an n-tier hierarchy would be better than creating DB context. So, is that Kamal Kobayac? You're going to see this turns into n-tier architecture. What do you see? So, you can define a database connection string in here. It's that ODBC connection string with here's where to go and get this. But I'm actually going to write to disk using SQLite. So the directions to register our database context service are going to be written a little bit like this. Now let me copy this and put it into what's called my startup file over here, where we configure our services. And let me explain what this is after I paste it in here. So our startup file, this class, has all the information necessary to start up the web server. And there's basically three methods here. There's a constructor called startup, and it's taking some configuration information about the application. We'll talk more about configuration later, but it takes in some configuration information and stores it here in this, we saw properties earlier, here in this configuration property. The startup class also has configure services. And just like the comment says here in the default template, it is used to add services to the dependency injection container, to the service locator container that we have available. We have services that are injected into all of our application that we're running here in ASP.NET. And by using this, we can configure what services are available. So we say things like services, add a database context. Here's how I want you to interact with Entity Framework. And the database context I want you to use inside of these angle brackets, this specifies the type of it. And the type we want to add is that application DB context we had before. And I've got a little red underline there. I control dot, and it'll give me my using statement for that. There we go. Now, there's options we need to configure. So inside the parentheses that we have here in Visual Studio should, there we go. It'll give me a little highlighting here to show me which parenthesis that matches up with. And I'm going to define some options, and I have this This is actually an equals greater than, but when I put them next to each other, my font turns it into what we call a fat arrow. So that's an equals greater than, and here are the options that I want to configure for it. So the default source code here that comes with the workshop says, well, take a look at the operating system, and if we're on Windows, use SQL Server. I'll do another control dot to get my Entity Framework core information in here. And if we're not on Windows, use SQLite. Well, I don't have SQL Server installed, so what I'm going to do is actually chunk this down to just use SQLite. All right. And I'm going to, I see these spaces here, and it's freaking me out because I'm a tabs person. So, right, I can see it still put the, why do I have that there? Expression value is never used. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right. So, I've configured and I've specified use SQLite, and my data source says we're going to write a file called conferencesdb. Fantastic. Real easy to use that. You're right. Is that Slaway? When you do install Visual Studio, you can install SQL Local DB. I uninstalled it. Call you Kamal. Fantastic. I'll remember that. Thank you. I appreciate the note about your name, and I want to make sure I get everybody's name correctly here as we talk to chat. Yes, we are keeping it simple and progressing to better. Great way to describe it there, Space Shot. Thank you. Quoting Mark, this is a good point for folks coming from .NET Framework. Coming from .NET Framework to .NET Core, I found startup and DI the toughest aspect of converting, adding to your knowledge. Not easy for beginners to know that you can do what you can do in that class. Mark's right. There's a lot that you can do here, and configure services is, like I was explaining, it's how we can configure those services, those things that are going to be available across the rest of my application. So I'm going to configure database access. I can configure logging in here. I can configure all the different things that many parts of my application are going to use, and I'll show you later how we inject those services into other classes. It's really neat. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Thank you, Bossman Snake, for the follow. Appreciate that. So now it knows how to make this available, how to use the database, how to have a database context that we're going to interact with. So now let me go back over here. We've created these using statements. Yes, I did that. So the next thing are these things called migrations. So migrations are the way that we have those statements that you use to update your database, right? When you deploy to a production area, you always have that, wait a sec, how did the database change between the last time I deployed to production and all the changes that I wrote in development, in testing, since that last time? What alter table statements do I need to write, or create new table, or create view, or what changes do I need to make to the database so that what I'm deploying to production matches? Well, we have this package called Entity Framework Tools that I'm going to install that allows you to generate and manage migrations. And migrations are directions that indicate here's how the model has changed so that the database can be updated by just saying, well, take the new migrations and apply them. Really, really neat. Hey, Brave Cobra, you like the new mod view interface? I'm glad you enjoy it. I think it's really cool. It looks a little bit like the broadcaster's view. Really, really great stuff there. I'm like, oh my goodness. All right. Looking down here, just trying to keep up with all the things that are going on here. Marcus asks a good question there. Let me flip back over to here. Marcus asks a question about this database context here. Let me put Marcus' question up here. it didn't show up. Let me turn the auto display. There we go. Should the database context be transient or scoped? Now this is just a little bit further into this, but services that are registered here can be declared with one of 3 different scopes, different lifetime scopes. They can either be transient, which means every time that I request one of these, make a new one. They can be a singleton that says, well, it's the Highlander.
There can be only one.
And there only ever is one, and it's managed for you by the service locator. And there's also scoped, which means every time there's a new request, a new web request that is handled, it creates a new one that's available for the life of managing that web request. And after the web request is done being processed, it releases it and back into the pool. By using this syntax, add DB context, by default, it creates scoped instances of our database context. You'll sometimes hear that referred to as a unit of work pattern, because you'll start the database context, do your work, and get rid of it at the end of that request. So you have that same database context available for the entire duration. So those changes you make all get committed at one time before you're done working, just before you're done working with the request. Thank you for the question. And there are other ways to tune that, absolutely. There's ways that you can say, right, that you can turn this around and turn it into what's called a context pool, where it will allocate more connections of these so that you get better interactions, better requests for database connections. You don't need to do that for how small this application is, but DB context pool is a feature that you can light up there as well. They are pooled, but DB context pool really forces the ability to do pooling, and it does a couple other optimizations for how you interact with it. All right. So we've brought in the tools so we can create our migrations. So let's create an initial migration and update the database. Tell it to go and generate that. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can execute and do these migrations. If you're running Visual Studio, there are some PowerShell commandlets that you can run inside the Package Manager console. And that's PowerShell right there. Easy for you to use. But most folks are going to be here at the command line. So we're going to install the .NET Entity Framework tools. And this is a global tool. We heard some chatter earlier about global tools that are available to you as a .NET developer everywhere. This is already installed on my machine, so I can move forward with it. I'm going to build my project and add that initial migration. So let me do this. We'll build the project with .NET build. And it's going to go and build everything here for us. There we go. 0 warnings, zero errors. I'm going to add an initial migration here. So all of our commands are kind of .NET, and then the tool name, EF, a noun, migrations, and then a verb, add. After that, I have the initial parameter. I've named my migration initial. So we'll execute that, and it's going to create my initial migration that defines how we're going to interact with the database, with just our new object that we've defined. Yes. But it created it, and now if I go over to my project, check it out. There's a migrations folder here, and I've got 2 new files. And let me show you what these files are, because they're kind of important. Here's our initial folder. I'm sorry, our initial migration. And it's named after the time when this was created and the name at the end, so that you have a key that you can kind of take a look at and see what it's doing. But it generates this C# code that defines for the database how to update and what to make it look like. So when I say execute the initial migration, we're going to update to that next version that has the initial migration built. We're going to create a table named speakers. Here's our ID field, our name field, our bio and website, just like we had back here in the speaker class. It's going to create those in the database, and it's going to create a primary key automatically for us. If we need to back out this migration, if we need to roll it back, in order to roll it back, well, the reverse that happens is it's going to drop the table. Easy. Makes sense. So that allows us to kind of queue these up so we see the difference between the two. And this is a snapshot of what it looks like at the end of all of the migrations being applied, so that the model builder, and that's what does our entity relationship mapping between the relational database, and our entities, our classes here in C#. This is what's defining the connection between those two, so that it can load this very quickly and get us mapped and working with the database. So you'll see more migrations added as we go and create new features in the database, for the database. So I've created it. Well, now let's actually update the database. Easy enough. .NET EF database, right there's the thing we're acting on, database, and the verb, update. Apply those migrations that haven't been applied yet. So let's apply those, and after I'm done this, I'll show you what the database looks like, and I'll come back over to the chat room and answer some questions. So it rebuilt because we now have that migration file in there. Build succeeded, and it gives us the ever helpful done command output to indicate that it's done. So if I look at my directory now, there's my SQLite database conferences DB. So if I look at my database browser for SQLite, let's open that up and take a look at cdev, the ASP.NET Core Workshop, Twitch Workshop folder. We are down in this, and over here, there's the database file, and you can see inside the file, I have a speakers table, and it has those columns that we were talking about. And it also has a table over here called Migrations History, EF Migrations History. This indicates there's the name of the migration we applied, and here's the .NET Core version that we used to apply it. So in the database, it keeps a log of what version and what migrations have been applied. This way we can make that quick comparison and know what new updates need to be applied to update the database to match the version of our application. So the moral of the story, friends, is don't delete this table. Leave it out there, all right? And we have a sequence table so it can count appropriately. So there's our conferences DB file. Let me take a look back here at the chat room. Let me see if there's some questions here to answer. All right. Brave Cobra asks, would you migrate the database upon startup or as a separate process, tool, or program? Good question. Let me highlight that from Brave Cobra. And I like that you're kind of pushing a little bit of this here. That's good. Would you migrate the database at startup? Would you always update and say, put down the latest version of this? In development mode, where we're making changes a lot to our database, it may make sense to update the database on startup. And there's a configuration you can put into your application to force that to happen. But when you're getting ready to deploy to production and you're going to have that production release, you don't want to be touching the database and updating the structure of it when you get into production. At that point, when you're ready to update your production database, you should run it as a separate process. Same thing about quality assurance. If you have a test instance of your application, or a stage instance, some folks call it, run that migration only when you update, not every time you start the application. So, let me continue scrolling through chat here. Confused Lele asks, wouldn't it be easier to do this in the console inside Visual Studio? Yes, you can do that. I like doing it at the command line out here. It both work the exact same way. Doing it out here at the Windows console, it shows that you can do it. Maybe it's in your Bash console, maybe it's in your Mac terminal, wherever you might be working. It'll work over there as well, not just inside of Visual Studio, or you're right, Binary Chef, or the terminal inside Visual Studio Code. Your choice. It works everywhere. But thank you for pointing that out, Confused Lele. Let me continue here. This is Rickety Rocket asks, why do you need a snapshot and another database context? So I actually don't have another database context. Let me show you. The one database context here, this is extending the default entity framework database context, giving it some additional features that light up and add okay, that light up and got a text from the boss, got to double check on that. This application DB context customizes the default context that comes along with entity framework to add the speakers feature. The context model snapshot, and you notice it's actually the full name of that other class. This is the model snapshot for that indicates here's the properties in the database and how they map. So it can load and get that mapping very quickly instead of having to generate and figure out where the mappings occur. It's just a way to shortcut that by generating some code for us. Okay, good. Let me continue looking down here. So, migrations and you are not always the best friends, says Jean Valjean. I'm sorry. Let's see. Get the source code. Bit of an a newbie question here from. Let me make sure I get this. Is that Frodozy asks, what are the main benefits to using .NET for web apps as opposed to PHP or some other framework? Thank you for the sub. Oh my gosh, thank you for the sub. Is that Ragnarok Arknos? Thank you so much. Janescu, thank you for the host. And Priesto Sorrow, thank you for the follow. To answer this question, what are the main benefits? So with .NET being free and open source, what you're seeing is .NET, C#, ASP.NET Core is being tuned to the nines for performance, and is according to the Tech Empower independent benchmarks, the fastest commercially available framework, web framework. So PHP significantly slower, Node significantly slower. Node doesn't support multi-threading. .NET does. There's some experimental Java web servers that you can get, Java application servers that can be tuned and run just as fast. Really great stuff. But .NET has amazing tooling for productivity. And you're seeing some of that here with Visual Studio to help you build code faster and not have to think about some of those things that are going on in memory management and how you construct objects. It's really built to help you build applications faster. InScore, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. And C# does work with PHP. There's a project called PeachPie that'll help you compile and use it. Haha, you missed the beginning of the workshop. Go ahead and rewind. There's the videos being recorded. You can go ahead and rewind. Wet Seal asks a good question about migrations. Should migration be part of the deployment process when deploying to production? Yes, very much so. That's exactly when you want to be using it. When you push to that next environment, you do the deploy, run that .NET EF database update. Update the database as you're deploying, and you warm up and bring that next server online. This way your database is in sync with your server, and it has the same version of data architecture as you do the application that's going to interact with it. Good question. Thank you. Continuing to scroll here. Yeah, snapshot is also used to help determine the next migration. Yes. Is this Tenorax asks, if I have a compiled application ready to deploy to a server, does that mean I need to have EF tools installed to be able to run a migration on the production server? The EF tools will go along with it. Check this out. when you, I would have to publish. I don't want to publish right now. When you publish, that EF Tools DLL that has that capability in it will be made available. It'll copy along with you when you publish so that you can run the command when you get to the next environment. You're going to want the .NET SDK to be available over there as well. You can install and run that in that target environment so that you can run the .NET commands when you get there. All right. Let me see here. Space Shot, it makes another great point about .NET. It can be used for all kinds of apps, not just web applications like PHP and Node and Rails, but websites, desktop, mobile, games, cloud scale applications, IoT applications, all these different places. If you want to be able to reuse code across all of those things, .NET is a great series of technologies to enable that reuse. Thank you. C# is the main benefit for Ducasoft. C# is a very advanced language. Not advanced. I'll rephrase. A very mature language that has tremendous features that are added to it, with a dedicated team that continue to innovate and add features that other programming languages are picking up and adopting. One of the two. They're adopting. Things like you're seeing async and await in JavaScript now. That started in C#. Things like generics, right? That got into Java. Started in C#. So things that are being brought out and shared with the entire community are being innovated in C# first. Is that Avkenzo? Welcome in. Appreciate the follow. Bald-bearded Builder likes adding logic in API startup to do the migration for him. So the first time newly deployed code runs an environment, it updates the environment. You're gonna have to do. You should do a little bit of a check to do that. Like you said, it's not just a straight call, but some logic check to do it first and then apply it. That's doable, but you do need to be careful. You don't want it to run every time the application starts. But if you can gate it, logic gate it, you can get some success with that. Is that D-Rex, Soul Stealer, and S. Chris? Welcome in. Thank you so much for the follows. Continuing here. Someone used ASP.NET for a reason, and it's because they wanted to avoid PHP. Yes, here's another good point from Winter Lore Games. .NET is very decompilable due to a lot of tools on GitHub and the like. There's a great tool out there called Reflector. Do I have that right? That will allow you to decompile .NET applications and see the source code for it. So really great stuff, and I'm glad we got all these really good questions here. Reflector and .NET Peak. There you go. DN Spy is available as well. Cool. Very cool. There's a lot of tools out there to help with this. You're going to find the .NET community, the .NET ecosystem. It's a very rich ecosystem with a lot of companies involved that are making open source projects available, commercial projects available, products available to help you be more productive. So there's explanations of the commands. Let's talk now about the APIs that we built. We're not even done the first module here. Let's get through this. And we're 2 hours in. Oh my goodness. So here we go. We can build controllers. You know what? Let's look at this first before I go and build a controller. Let's do that. So we have a folder up here called controllers. Now, this is built using that MVC architecture, Model View Controller, MVC. And controllers, like we have here, are built as a class that inherits from controller base that will respond to requests that come into some sort of HTTP endpoint. And this is an API controller. So it's intended for machine interactions. We can build other types of controllers that'll render HTML or JSON or other data that we may want to interact with. But this is designed to interact with data as an API endpoint. So what we're going to do here with this is a weather controller, right? This is the sample data that it comes with. It's marked as an API controller, right? Here's another one of these attributes, and it's saying this is going to behave like an API. This class isn't something that humans are going to read, but APIs are going to interact with. Machines are going to communicate with this to get data and output information. And this right here, I mentioned the controller listens on some HTTP endpoint. Well, our web server has paths that you browse to, right? You'll go to things like, you're here on Twitch. You'll go to twitch.tv/C#Fritz. That /C#Fritz, that folder location is someplace that on Twitch it's being resolved and turned into my channel. Or maybe you're watching on youtube.com/C#Fritz. And YouTube is turning that /C#Fritz into some direction that is actually going and saying, oh, well, that's Jeff's channel. Let's load up that data. Well, that's handled by something called a route. And a route is how we declare where exactly this class is going to interact and process the requests that come in from users, from a browser, from those other machines. So this is going to listen on, now Square Controller, this is a template. This is kind of a trick here that you can use, right? A macro almost, that says we're going to grab the name to listen to is actually everything to the left of the word controller in the name of this class. So by convention, you name your controllers something controller, and it helps to identify to other folks that this is a controller. And you can use things like this markup, this directive, to say, well, grab everything to the left of that, and that's where we're going to answer. That's where this controller is going to behave. Now, we have things in here that are properties that are, well, this is a field here, a read-only field that is a logger for the weather forecast controller called _logger. And we have another field up here that it's a collection of different summaries, weather summaries, as an array of text. Freezing, bracing, chilly, cool, mild, warm, balmy, hot, sweltering, scorching, whatever, right? This isn't doing a real forecast. It's just making one up so you can see what it looks like. But down here, this is a constructor that defines how you construct a weather forecast controller. And we spoke about dependency injection earlier from our startup class, right? Our startup class, it configures controllers in this application, and we added the ability to interact with databases. Well, here we're receiving a logger interface, iLogger. That's an interface that defines how we can log information. And we're going to receive one for the weather forecast controller called logger. Right, that's the variable name, and we'll pass that along into this field. We'll store it so we can reference it later. And this is a private field. Only this class can access that logger, okay? If it was public, it could be accessed outside the class. And we have one method defined in here, and it's a method because we have a scope identifier, public, right? This is publicly accessible by outside this class. And we have it's going to output a collection, an IEnumerable collection, a collection of weather forecasts that you can get. You can use the HTTP get verb to return these. And we have an attribute on this to kind of force and declare that this is going to handle a get request to that weather forecast location. We're just going to set up a random number generator. Take a look at the collection of weather forecasts. Well, we're going to generate some weather forecasts and randomly bring in some sort of a summary verb here, one of these words, along with some random temperature between -20 Celsius and 55 Celsius, and return that as an array. It's just a random collection. I don't care. We're using this as a sample. So the logger is created by default. Nothing is being logged here by default. We could log if we wanted to, and we'll see that a little bit later. So I can run this, and I can actually navigate to that weather forecast controller and see what it looks like. If I right-click, I can say build here. There's also up here, I can say run it with IIS Express. I can also run it on the command line by changing this over to the name of my project. Click that, and it'll run on the command line. Open a browser and let me navigate around the application. I see some other questions coming through on chat. I'll come back to that in just a second. Let me let this start up. I thought we started. Where is it? Start my project. Let's go. You see the little building thing here? Do. Come on. There it is. So here's the console. It's running it on the command line. Visual Studio is running the web application on the command line. Why the command line? Because the command line is available on every operating system. It's the great equalizer. So we'll run it here on the command line, and you can see some debugging information popping up here. But here, we're getting some information logged automatically that it's listening. Now, here's what my weather forecast looks like that was randomly generated, and it generates it in JSON format. And it looks kind of ugly. I could open this with another browser that has some pretty JSON formatting in here. Let me go over to a Firefox. I'll open up another Firefox. And there, I have some nice formatting, so you can see I have 16 Fahrenheit, -9 Celsius, and it's chilly, balmy, warm, right? It's just counting up the days. No big deal, right? But here's a way that we've connected and gotten data out of our application. Simple. And we're going to do that. We're going to set this up so that we're going to start interacting with and getting session data out of our application. So that's what a controller looks like. We need to create a controller now for our speakers. So we're going to generate one here using Visual Studio. You can also do it at the command line. There is a package called Code Generation that's made by the Visual Studio folks that you can use to automatically generate some code here for us. And the code generator templates for ASP.NET are down here. But I'm going to use this up here so you can see how Visual Studio does this. So I'm going to right click on the controllers folder, add a controller, and it wants me to create it, for application DB context. And it API controller with actions using entity framework, because we want to create an API here. So I'll choose my model, which is a speaker. The data context, how are we actually connecting and working with our speaker? And it's a speaker's controller. So it'll install those same NuGet packages it listed at the command line. And it's going to generate my speaker's controller here in just a second. While that's going, let me take a look back over here at the chat room, see if we have some questions to answer. Kamal asked a question here. Is there any change to the way that Silicon Valley developer looks at C#? Their perception of C#. In the past, some developers don't like C# just because it's developed by Microsoft. I think Microsoft made a huge peak, especially after 2014, in starting to develop .NET Core. You're not wrong, Kamal. There definitely was a bias against C# and .NET because there's a little bit of not developed here. There's a little bit of I don't want to give my money to Microsoft because they're the big 900-pound gorilla, right? It's definitely changed, and folks in the angel investor community, in the venture capitalist community, have recognized that you get really great performance, and there's a lot of folks that know how to do C# and .NET. So it is getting more acceptance in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a funny place that's very entrenched in different things, but it is gaining traction there. Let me take a look. Scrolling down here. There is app obfuscation, yes, available if you want to obfuscate your code. Space Shot makes a very good point here. The team would not have participated, the .NET team would not have participated in a benchmark like Tech Empower. the ASP.NET team has not only turned the heads of the community, but also of other folks at Microsoft. And you're seeing more folks embracing, more products, Microsoft products, embracing open source and engaging with those individual communities so they can make everybody better and allow everybody to build great applications, no matter the platform. And Binary Chef makes a very good point here. Silicon Valley isn't quite the real world. Okay?
Wait, let me explain something to you.
They want to innovate. They want to innovate things fast, and they come up with weird ideas like Uber for pets. What? Why do I need Uber for my pet? So there's all kinds of funny things that happen in Silicon Valley that folks do. Yes, C# has been open source for years, but of particular note, the Roslyn compiler, when that landed in the mid-2010s, really kind of lit the fuse for .NET programming languages to be available. Bubble? No, I don't think so. Uber for pets. Yep, that is something that was proposed in Silicon Valley and got a lot of investment. So I've got my speaker controller, right? Let me show you. By default, it references, there's my application DB context. And remember when over here I added the database context to my service locator services, I can now receive it in the constructor over here, and ASP.NET will automatically make this available to me, and I can use that database connection inside this controller. So it automatically generated for me. I can navigate to API/speakers, and I'll get the list of speakers. Or I can go to API speakers and some ID number, and it'll return just that speaker, right? And there's information down here about a put, right? So I can put and say, well, update this speaker's information. Or post, here's a new speaker to insert, to add to the database. And there's even delete down here that says, well, delete the speaker with this ID. Uber Eats and Madrinas. Yeah, that's it. That would be a thing. Sure, absolutely. So that was generated all for us. I didn't have to write any of that, right? And that's really great stuff. There we go. Oh my gosh, I'm almost done my first cup of coffee. That's a little bit of Madrina's coffee, but I'm gonna jump in like the bald-bearded builder has done here. I'm gonna move to my next cup of coffee. I'm gonna get a little vanilla cappuccino here. It's got a green label on it, so it disappears in the chroma key. Kind of funny like that. I really enjoy supporting Madrinas, and let me show you. I've got a T-shirt here from, this is Pudge's Cheesesteaks here in Southeast Pennsylvania. They're a local store owned by a family that sells cheesesteaks, sells subs, if you call them that in your part of the world. We call them hoagies where I'm from. In this time when so many businesses are closed down and we want to support our local businesses that are staying open to help feed the public, I'm wearing my Pudge's shirt here to promote and let them make sure they know that we're thinking of those folks. I made sure I bought the T-shirt last night from them, and I overpaid, paid a little bit extra to those folks. Show them a little appreciation and thanks for keeping things running here. I've heard. Okay, hang on. Can I pause for just a second here? There's a really. Hold this for just one more second before we get back into testing our API. Is that Ragath Wow points out, I hope I pronounced that right. I've heard about this Fritz Coke in Germany. And folks have sent me pictures of it, and I've even seen someone Photoshop my face onto the Coke bottle. I would love to try this, but I don't know where to get it. It's from Hamburg. Okay. Okay. My favorite Madrina's coffee right now, it's the vanilla cappuccino. I really enjoyed they have a cafe mocha that's really good, and there's also a vanilla, cafe vanilla that That was the first Madrinas I tried. And you always love your first. So I really like the 2 vanilla Madrinas flavors. To that. Oh, Death Knight. Yes, make sure you get it. How many coffees is in 8 hours of ASP.NET Core Workshop? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Is 6 good? 6 is good. 6 will make this work, and we'll be feeling magical by the end of this. True story, there's a steak dinner waiting for me at the end of this, and a bottle of bubbly to celebrate. All right, let's get into this. So, back into what it's saying here. The next piece of this, we want to test that API. It was kind of ugly looking at just the straight JSON in our browser. I'd like to interact with it with something that's more like OpenAPI, and we can use a plugin called Swashbuckle. The OpenAPI used to be called Swagger. And, well, who swaggers? Well, pirates have swagger, so they called it Swashbuckle. It's a stretch, but that's the name of the project. So we're going to add Swashbuckle into our project to light up the ability for us to query and interact with a really nice user interface, and to make some easy-to-use APIs available, standard APIs available for folks to be able to consume and use. So we can add Swashbuckle by executing a .NET add package statement. Let me head back over here to my command line. Here we are. And I'll paste in that add package statement, execute it, and it's going to go download it, insert it into my project, and make it available. Now, I've added a couple packages into the project, and you might be asking me, Jeff, where's it put that? In NPM, I have that package.json file, and I forget the name of the file that we have in what is it, pip.py in Python, and is it pair.php in PHP? I forget the names of those files. Yeah, Fritz Cola. Yeah, that's the name of the Coke. Where does .NET put these references? In .NET world, we have project files, and this is backend.csproj. You saw it here when I look at my folder. There it is, backend.csproj. When you look at this, it's an XML format. It's XML for backwards compatibility. All versions of .NET have this format, and we have our package references right here. Real easy for us as humans to be able to read, and easy for the machine to parse and turn into references to load and bring in these various packages. We also have a target framework specified up here. We're targeting .NET Core 3.1, and we're using, in particular, a web flavor of the .NET SDK, so that it knows it's targeting and building something web-ish. So, Fritz Cola, there it is. Surly Dev, oh my goodness. Oh, that's kind of unnerving that they doubled the price of their sandwiches at their local shop. And I understand it might be a little bit difficult to get ingredients, to get supplies for restaurants, and they may need to raise their prices to accommodate some of those things. I'm okay with that in this time of need right now. And my goal is to ensure that those local shops stay in business. So that's where these packages land. So I just added Swashbuckle, and we can now start adding Swagger configuration by adding Swagger generation here into our services. So let me go over here, back into startup. Let me close everything except for this. Tidy up the tab bar up there. So I'll add the ability now for Swagger to be able to interact, and I've got a red underline there. We'll clean that up. So we're adding Swagger generation. Generate the APIs for OpenAPI and Swagger. And we're going to generate a little bit of Swagger documentation saying that this is API version 1, And it's called the Conference Planner API, and there's version 1 down there. And actually, V1, I think, is in the folder hierarchy. Yep, we got our using statements up here. And this is neat. We can use Swagger into this part down here. This is the third part of the startup. I didn't mention this earlier. This is our HTTP pipeline. When a request comes in, right, somebody browses to the website, somebody makes an HTTP request into our application. It goes through this pipeline from top to bottom. So we chain these commands by saying app use something. You'll also see app.map or app.run are two different other ways that things are named as you come in here. But the first one says make sure we're using HTTPS. Make sure it's on a secure socket. Turn on routing. We want to be able to route things. And now I just added Swagger information to the pipeline. If Swagger information is requested, route appropriately. And add the Swagger user interface that's built and sitting in one of these packages for us. And it's going to have data sitting at this location, this JSON endpoint, and we'll serve that appropriately so folks can interact with it. Finally, there is a thing that we put in here to kind of cheat. So it'll navigate automatically to our Swagger endpoint when you just run the application. So let's run the application, navigate to it, and take a look. Should the code be before use routing? No, I want to use set up the routing first, and then configure the routing capabilities after. I believe that's how it's done. I think that's how I've done it. The things that you set up in this startup class, this is like set it and forget it mode. These are things that you're going to set up once and you're not going to come back to. It's just there. You don't have to reference it, and it just works. So now if I go to the root of my application, see it rerouted me automatically to index.html, and it has my API definition, Conference Planner v1, just like it had inside my documentation. And I can even navigate directly to that JSON and see exactly what my Swagger definition is, my OpenAPI definition is for this API. There's different responses. There's different formats that it'll give you, where these things are located, how you can find them at that $ref location. But I have this really cool user interface, so I can actually click through and say, well, go get that list of speakers that we have. And when I click execute, it's actually doing a curl. You know what a curl is. Curl is execute this HTTP command. We want to get at this location and pass in a header and see what comes out of it. Well, we didn't get any speakers because there aren't any speakers yet. Kabazi and some folks are saying that it should be before routing. It's working. It says use just before use routing. I have it working just fine for me here. If I move it down there and rerun it, that's okay. Swagger was added after the project. Alright, so that's the weather forecast endpoint. I'm going to delete that, and there's all of our content. It worked just the same. So, I can even add speakers. Here, I can say try it out, and it'll give me, well, here's the format of what this should look like. So, I'm going to add a name, and we'll add me. Jeff is... Let's open this up a little bit. Oh, you're not going to let me make it wider? Jeff is a really nice guy, and my website is https://jeffreyfritz.com. I can click execute, and it will attempt to post that. If I zoom out here a little bit. So there you go, curl post, and it's accepting text. It's going to push JSON content, and there's what it updated. And the response was, well, here, Jeff's ID 1. And I can download that and look at it. And if I go back up here to my get, we execute that, I can see here, we're going to go get that data. And now in the response, I get information about that one speaker that was created. Great. So I've got a simple little piece here that allows me to interact with, to test out that API and see that it works. Cool. Thank you, Kabazi. And we're going to get into that, Kamal. Oh, that's coming up. That's spoiler alert in the chat room. I just closed my browser with GitHub, didn't I? Rats. There we go. All right, so we tried that out. Yep, and we can also get the weather forecast. They wanted to load Tyrion Lannister, but I load Dorothy Gale. All right, and I actually, you saw, entered my data. So click the try it out, and you're able to navigate around and see how it works. We're going to continue adding features to this. And we can continue adding features to that API. I don't think... Oh, yeah, there's more information that gets loaded up. And it's, yeah, you're going to see some new data updated down here. And what it looks like. Let me back up just that 1 second. We don't need that weather forecast controller. I'm going to get rid of that because we're not doing weather forecasts out of this. I'm going to right click on the project, choose properties. I'm going to set the debug location. So when we tell it to debug, I'm not going to go to weather forecast. We're just going to go right to the root of the website, which will take us into Swagger. So I'll rerun. Yep, and you can generate clients on the go from this as well. It's very similar to Postman's early dev, but it's embedded in the application, right? So you get documentation that kind of comes along with it. And there's ways to customize this with CSS and whatnot. So there I can actually query and say, well, give me just, right? Why aren't you letting me key this in? Try it out. Oh, now you'll let me key it in. And it'll give me just, right, speaker 1 is Jeff Ritz. And yes, we can customize this. We can add some annotations that will tell more information about what our speakers are, what they do, right? So instead of just returning speakers over here, I can add information about the speaker, the name of the speaker, biographical information about our speaker, right? And these are standard summary comments that .NET knows how to consume, and where you can learn more about our speaker, okay? And when I launch that, those comments now are going to turn into markup and features in that user interface. Check this out. Yep, Postman lets you generate test suites. Nothing's right. You're getting curl statements that come out of this that you can certainly use and learn more about and reuse however you'd like. So right there's information about, where is it? I can actually here, speaker. Open this up. And now, why didn't it include? What did I miss? It should have given me information about what those are. Schema. Saying it's right. It's giving me that annotation of the maximum length and whether it's nullable. But oh, wait a sec. There's a command to turn on for that. You have to turn on XML documentation, in order to get that to come through, is what I forgot. And did it get removed from this? It may have gotten dropped from this. Yeah. I always like showing this because you can generate the XML. Nah. Let me bring that up just because it's a cool demo. So dotnet, Swashbuckle, XML doc, and it's really neat how you can show this. Here we go. You can get the XML docs by turning on generate the documentation file here. Yeah, we're gonna want the no warn as well. Let me copy that whole block. So we can update our project and turn on additional features to say generate documentation from those summary notes that we put on there. And inside of, right, here we go. We can, inside of our project, we can, after the Swagger doc is defined here, we can actually load the documentation for it. So I'll go back over here, and that's in configure services. Yeah. Up here. So we'll paste that in. So it's going to go get the appropriate XML for this. And oh, that's inside of that. Not bad. Move that up there, add a space, tab it in, semi out there, and this is options. Oh. Need to just open this up a smidge. Right, there we go. So now it's going to add my XML documentation into this. Let me rerun and you'll see what's happening. Taking a look here. Here it comes. All right. So now if I scroll down here and look at my, there we go. So now in my schema, because I added that summary information, now it becomes very documenting of itself as to here's what this thing is. And even if I look over here at this JSON, right? There's the speakers, the parameters, the responses, right? And here's the information about the various queries. Where is it? The definition here. Speaker name is required, and it generates a description tag so that other APIs, other user interfaces can output, well, this is what this field is. So adding that little bit of documentation in your C# for this class, right? Not only did we add to this class this information that isn't really necessary, but just that little bit of documentation, now all kinds of folks can consume and learn about what these things are and benefit from it. Hey, Frank, good to see you. Yes, there are other plugins called NSwag and NSwag Studio that'll help to generate client-side code as well that'll allow you to interact with and query these APIs. So that's the back-end service. That's as simple as it gets to build a microservice, and we've really spent a lot of time talking through all the different features here to make sure that beginners understand how we're building this. They use something I believe called Dapper, Daryl Code Stuff. So, all right. That's just the first module. We're going to pick up speed here a little bit because I've explained some of these things, and we're going to start to add features now for the rest of the back-end services. We're going to create a conference object that we're going to pass around. We're going to create those other objects. We're going to make our speaker object a little bit more complex. And we're going to add attendees and sessions and these other things into our backend microservice project. So it has a complete way for us to interact with that data store where we're going to persist all of this data. And that's coming up in the next module.